Okay, all right. I know some people are still trickling in, but I'll go ahead and get the introduction started. So my name is Tyler Dew. I am with the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority, primary sponsors for College for North Carolina, as you might know it as CFNC. I just want to thank you all so much for spending your Thursday night with us. I know there's a lot of things that you could be doing on a Thursday night. So thank you so much for joining. Tonight, we are going to go over for students and families a step-by-step guide on the new 2026-27 FAFSA. So we're doing a FAFSA walkthrough. We'll be going over the most common situations of what you will see. But the great thing about live webinars like this is that we can answer your questions in real time. So this is going to be a recorded session, and we are going to be sending out both the recording and the slides to everybody who has attended and registered after this. But like I said with the Q&A, you can go ahead and submit questions and get your questions answered in real time. We are going to be answering those on the back end while our main speaker is going. So feel free to submit any questions that you have while we're going through the presentation, and we'll also address some afterwards as well. All right, so real quick before we get started, if you do find webinars like this useful, our next student webinar is going to be evaluating financial award offers. So we are in FAFSA February, so we're heavily focused on FAFSA related topics. And if you have been accepted to different colleges and universities and you have submitted your FAFSA already, then you will start to receive award letters, and we will go over basically the best way to compare those award letters and to know what exactly you're receiving from each place that you're interested in going to. And you can register for that webinar at cfnc.org/events. And like I said, we're going to be doing a walkthrough of the FAFSA tonight to kick off what we like to call FAFSA February. Our speaker is Lauren Trethaway. She is the Associate Director of Student Financial Aid for Wake Forest University. She has tons of experience with financial aid and she has a wealth of knowledge. So I will pass this off to her. And like I said, as she's going through her presentation, if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A and we will get rolling. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm excited to be with y'all tonight and to give you a walkthrough of the FAFSA, especially if you have not had the chance to get started yet. So we will get started. And again, Tyler mentioned this is going to be the most common um, walkthrough and scenario. Know that what you see may be more or less than what you see when you do the FAFSA, but this is kind of just the biggest overview we can provide. So this is assuming we've got a dependent student filling out the FAFSA. So you got to either start new form, edit, or accept the invitation. So we're going to pretend like the student is actually the one kicking off the application. So they would click on start new form. It's going to then take them to this landing page. Most of the time, high schools are really great about getting the students to go ahead and create their FSA ID, username and password, but if they don't, they will have to set that up. If they've already got it, they should be able to go ahead and log in. So again, for this purpose, we're going to pretend we're the student, but as you can see, you could start it either way. I encourage students to kind of own the process and kick it off and let the parent just be the secondary person that fills it out. So most of the time you would just have the student click on student. This is going to pull in information from their FSA ID. So all of it should be correct. If you need to update any of this, you actually have to do that through their settings in their account. You won't be able to make edits on this page. So just know that this is really just kind of like a review to make sure it's all correct. The next one is they have to select their state of residence and when they became a resident. Students seem to get tripped up on this. If you were born in the state you live in, you just put your birth date. So birth month, birth year, when you became a resident. A new-ish thing, a couple years old now, is providing consent. everyone has to provide consent to the IRS to try and kind of pull down the tax information directly from the IRS, which is great because it lowers errors when we try to manual entry stuff. It just leads to more errors. It also could help simplify the process later on for you if your student is selected for verification. So it gives you this disclosure here. It's quite long. So we captured, the different numbers in here. You have to hit approve to be considered for the most amount of aid possible. If you hit decline, then you will not be considered for aid. So it's really important that you do that. So once you do that, the system is behind the scenes going to ping the IRS based on your personal information and trying to pull it back into your FAFSA. In this case, it shows what it would look like if it could not be retrieved. It could also very well be retrieved, right? So in a lot of cases, you won't see this. It'll just take you into the next set of questions. It's fine if it says this. It could say this even if you did file a tax return. Sometimes if people file, later than the standard deadline, it may have not had time to fully process in the IRS system. So there's ways to manual enter the information. Again, it's just better when it can link it. The next part, we'll go over some personal circumstances that the student will walk through. It asks about their marital status, the students. Again, most of them are going to be single. Obviously, there could be some other scenarios. This part's really important. So this asks about their grade level, and if they'll have their first bachelor's degree. Sometimes it's hard to know how much is going to transfer in for your transfer credits. It may not be as, I guess, foggy if you're going from if you have a associate's from a dual degree, not a dual degree, a dual enrollment situation. Maybe that transfers in and you know it will transfer in. To me, it's always safe to put first year freshmen. The schools can always make that update. Unless you know for sure how many credits will transfer in. That's really what this is going to drive is the loan level amounts that you're eligible for. For this part, more than likely nobody's going to have this as a yes. So this is important because this can limit grant eligibility if you put yes because you're not eligible for certain grants on a second degree. So definitely make sure this one is no. Here's a list of personal circumstances that could be the case. All of these are going to have a little bit different things that may need to be done that you would coordinate with the schools directly to figure out what needs to happen. But in this case, we're going to pick none of these apply. There is a question about student homelessness. So if this is, true in this situation, you would answer yes. Again, we're going to go with a more standard dependent student scenarios. They're going to put no. And there's this extra unusual circumstances section where none of the other stuff applied to me, but I also can't contact my parents. You could put yes if that's the case, but majority of the time the answer is going to be no. So this, you can see, says based on the answers we put, you're a dependent student. This next part here is important because this determines what type of funding you're going to be eligible for. So if the parents are refusing to provide information, it's going to really limit what you can get. And so it's really important to only put yes if that's really the case. And if that's really the case, it makes you wonder if any of the previous unusual circumstances might be more fitting. Definitely a conversation to have with your school. The most common answer to this is no, because the parents are going to provide their information, but it will default to no. But just make sure you read the question thoroughly. Here you're going to hit a student demographics section. This is stuff that isn't shared with us at the school. I can attest to that. Working at a school, we don't get any of this demographic information. So it will ask you some things. There are some options to not provide the information on the slide before for background. Um, so that's an option as well if you don't want to provide that. Here, the student's going to select whether they're a citizen, eligible non-citizen, or neither. Here, ask about the parent's educational status, whether their parents didn't attend college, one or both parents, don't know. Don't know is an acceptable answer. Sometimes this might help schools identify students that are first generation students. Schools could have other uses for it, so it's just important that you answer this question accurately because it could help benefit you. There's a question if a parent was killed in the line of duty. Next, it asks about the high school completion status. So for most students that graduate from high school, they're going to have this top option as high school diploma. Um, it's not going to be what are you working on, but how have you completed your high school? So just make sure you answer one of these top three options because the bottom one here, none of the above, you're not going to be eligible for aid because you have to have completed high school to be eligible for federal aid. So it's important that you're selecting kind of one of those top three options to be eligible. Once you say you graduated from a high school and received a high school diploma, it asks you about the high school. So you'll have to search and find your high school. And then it'll have you confirm this is the right school, city, state. Then it moves on to the finances section. So we're still looking at just the student. Um, Again, you may see some additional questions here based on the fact it did not pull a tax return. You may or may not see all these questions. It will ask if they if they filed a form. If they filed it, what was their tax filing status? How much they earned from work? And here's another kind of overview of questions they would ask. Again, this is only because the student's information did not link with the IRS and they indicated they did file a tax return. If they just indicated they did not file a tax return, it wouldn't ask them this specific of questions. But because they said they did file a tax return, it is going to ask for them to manually enter the information. So you can see here that some of these boxes are filled out. FAFSA does require a 0 in the box. If there's nothing to report, you cannot leave it blank. It will give you like a soft error and not let you continue until you put a 0 in the box. So just know that if the answer is 0, you do have to put a 0. It may ask about assets, including cash checking savings, if there's any investments or any businesses. Again, same rule applies. You do have to put a 0 if there's not a figure. Then they're going to select schools that they want to send the FAFSA to. They can send it to up to 20 schools. They can enter by searching via like state and then city school name, or if they have the school code, then they can just enter the school code and add it. Can do up to 20. You have to have at least one to be able to continue. So you can always, start out with 3, and then if you want to add, you can go back in and add it even after you've submitted it. So up to 20. Also, the schools don't see who else you sent the FAFSA to, just as a peace of mind. So on this list, American Career College doesn't know that they sent it to the American Film Institute. So there's no worry about one school knowing you're applying to another school. That didn't used to be the case. We could see the schools, but now we can't. So it doesn't matter if you put all the ones you're applying to, they will never see who else you sent it to. This next part here is where you're going to invite your parent as a contributor. A contributor is basically a legal parent, biological or adoptive, who's going to provide their information to the FAFSA. How you do that this year has changed and it's fabulous, and you just put an email. So if mom's email is mymomisthebest@gmail.com, that's what you're going to put in. Send the invite. Mom will get the email. You don't have to put the name, match anything. Um, it tells you it's been sent on here. It also gives you this invite code down here in the little blue box on the bottom right-hand side. They're going to get an email with a link they can click on, and it'll also have the code. So you don't have to write it down. They will get that information to the email you put. After you invite your contributor, you're in the home stretch. You just have to review your form and sign it. So sometimes people get here and it feels like the end, and they maybe don't even hit continue. They just log out. So it's really important that you don't log out yet. You want to, expand your student sections and review them to make sure it's good. It shows you who the contributor is. If you realize you maybe made a mistake in the email, you can go in and update that under manage contributor information. And then once you hit continue, you get to your signature page. So here's where it goes over you're agreeing that put everything on here properly. And down at the bottom, you have to put a little check in the checkbox and hit sign. That's when it's actually signed. And you know it's signed because you'll get this cool submission page. It now says pending submission. It's pending because it's still waiting on your contributor to complete their portion before it's fully submitted. So now you know that the student portion is done, and it's now kind of moved into the parent portion, which we're going to go over next. So to me, this is kind of like, I would say a halfway point, but maybe it's a little more than halfway because the student part asks a little bit more information than the parent part. So now the student's done. The parent should have gotten this email that, again, I told you, is going to have a button invitation that they can click on, or it's going to have that code that we saw at the bottom of the screen. They can click on the accept invitation button, or they can log into their studentaid.gov and enter this same number as a contributor to the FAFSA. Either way, we're going to say this parent says accept invitation. The parent has to have their own FSA account separate than the student. We recommend everybody set up their own account. That way everyone knows their logins and passwords. They need to have different emails, different phone numbers. And that's just because if you get locked out or forget your password, the system, when there's same numbers in there or email, the wires can get crossed. So it's really important that everyone just has their own complete logins. So they're going to log in or create an account if you need to. It'll auto-populate the invitation code if you click on accept invitation. And once you hit submit, it's going to say, you're agreeing to share your information to their FAFSA, which is what we want to do because we want to kind of merge the data so it can be fully submitted. So you'll hit accept. It's going to do a similar thing where it wants you to verify the parent information. The parent also has to provide consent. Again, consent means we're saying, yes, we want our student to be able to be eligible for federal aid. And that means it's going to allow them to go to the IRS and try to pull down the tax information for you so you don't have to manually input it. It's the exact same consent wording for the student and the parent. They both do have to be approved. So again, this may not be the screen you get. Hopefully you get a screen that says your information has been imported. And again, it's going to shorten the amount of questions you might have to answer. But in this case, there's no tax information available. We chose this option because it shows kind of the most questions that might ask versus it's a more streamlined process if you do link your taxes. So we want to give you kind of the most. So here it's going to ask a little bit about the family demographics. The parent is going to put their marital status. For this example, we're going to pick married. We know there's tons of scenarios out there. Schools are always willing to have those conversations with you if you're curious how it's going to play out for your family, what parent needs to be on the FAFSA. Those are all great conversations to have with your individual schools, or high school counselors might even have information. But for this example, we're choosing married, not separated. The parent is going to also give their residency and when they became a resident. Now it's going to jump into the parent finances. It asks the parent if there were any federal benefits received during 2 years. So in this case, it's 24 or 25. If any of them apply, you would check them. If none of them apply, that's what you would select. Here it's going to ask if the parent was required to file a tax return. And in this case, because they're married, it asks, did you file a joint tax return? So here they're saying, based on the tax information that was entered, the family size is 5. Enter how many will, enter how many kids are going to receive support. So that's where they updated it to 2. So it's got a parent, the parent, spouse or partner, the student is 1, and then 2 other kids other than the student. So that makes this family size 5. If you do use, if your kind of link to the IRS does work, it's going to pull in your deductions automatically that you put, your exemptions that you put on the tax return. It'll give you a chance to correct that because we know that working with kind of 2-year-old information may not always reflect the current situation. So if you do use that, if your taxes do link, you still will get a chance to modify it. It's not just in this kind of manual route. So you'll get a chance to update that should you need to. But this one is, again, assuming parent is married, the student that we're filling the FAFSA for, and there's 2 other siblings, which generates that family size of 5. Here it asks how many people will be in college out of that 5, and for them, it's just that student. Now it's going to ask tax return information about 2024. So for this FAFSA that we're going over for 26, 27, that is the tax return year that is being used, is the 2024 taxes. So in this case, they did file married jointly. They're filling out all these other lines off their tax return. It gives, I know it's really small, but it does give you some instructions on which lines to enter and which lines you may need to add together. So hopefully that text is helpful for you. Again, if there's nothing in that box, like this foreign earned income exclusion, you do still need to put a 0. The parents are going to be asked about their assets, so if any child support, and then the same other 3 that the student got asked. Because they filed jointly, the other parent isn't going to need to log on to the FAFSA. If they did not file jointly, then the other parent would be invited at this point. But because they filed jointly, they're just going to ask for the birth date. So now the parent gets to do their review. They can again expand these little sections and make sure everything is accurate. It's going to give you your, I agree, all this information is truthful. They check the little box at the bottom, hit submit. Now this page right here is the one we're looking for because it's congratulations, the FAFSA is complete. So now it's actually going to be processed and sent to the schools once it's fully processed. Until it says it's completed, it's not complete. The student will be able to log back into their FSA to see why it's not complete, but it's really important that the families are doing kind of both steps, right? The student needs to do their portion, and then the parent needs to come in as the contributor and do their portion. But this one now is done because both the student did their part and signed it, and now the parent did their portion and signed it. So once you've submitted it, the student can kind of log back into their student aid account and they can review a FAFSA submission summary. Um, there's some different tabs to go over, right? If you just want to look at it, you can see it. There are a lot of scholarships that request the summary. They want to see like an official results of your FAFSA that has the student aid index, especially if it's a need-based scholarship. So this upper right-hand print FAFSA submission summary might be really valuable for you and your student as y'all are doing some scholarship applications. You can also keep a copy for your records, but it will be available when you log back in at any time as well. So I know that was a lot of information. And again, I showed you kind of the longest version, right? There's a chance that it could be a lot shorter version for you, especially if your taxes are able to link from the IRS. But hopefully that gives you a little overview of what to expect. I'm going to stop sharing and see what kind of questions we got.
Yes, thank you so much, Lauren. That was a wonderful information. And we've been getting tons of fantastic questions on the back end, and we've been able to answer pretty much all of them. So I did
Nice.
have some that I wanted to highlight just because I think it's good for everybody to hear.
Yeah.
Um, so one question that came in, what happens if I already submitted the FAFSA, but my parents had a job change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is like the dance with FAFSA data, right? So something that I remind families to think about, and we know as aid administrators this is the case. When you submit your FAFSA, it's 2 years old tax information. It's right now, what are your assets? And it's next academic year, who's going to live in your house, right? So that gets really tricky, and we know that that doesn't always line up. Um, Unfortunately, FAFSA itself doesn't allow you to capture this information. There are some schools that use a CSS profile that may ask, that may have a free text spot, but unfortunately, FAFSA doesn't. It usually just requires a reach out to each individual school to see what their process is to request kind of a reevaluation based on a change of circumstance. We know that happens. It happens often. It happens before students are admitted. It happens after students are admitted before they start school. And it can even happen while your student is enrolled, right? So we know that that happens, and we just encourage you to make sure you're in communication with the individual aid offices to see what their process might be, because they're all going to be different, right? Every school could have something a little bit different that you need to do. At some schools, it might be a form. Some schools, you may just need to submit a statement to kick off the process. But just don't be shy to speak up about it, and let the school know that there's been a change.
All right, thank you for that. And yeah, if you still have questions, y'all, please keep submitting them through the Q&A. We are still monitoring them, and I will highlight the one that I think is good for everybody to hear. So another one that I think is definitely going to relate to a lot of people watching this. Does my Pell Grant have to be repaid after I graduate?
Oh, yeah. So, no, the grants are the free money, right? We love the free money. Um, Grants do not have to be repaid. There's the Pell Grant. Sometimes there might be the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. Your schools might have scholarships or grants you award. There could be state grants that are awarded. Grants 99% of the time are ones you don't have to pay back. There are a few that could be, but those terms are going to be outlined for you. Pell Grant is not one of them. You'll never have to pay that back. The only time that it could be returned is if you happen to withdraw before completing a term. There could be a portion sent back, but it's not like you have to repay the government situation. That would be between you and your school, if there was any type of balance.
All right, thank you. That's very important information for people who are
Yeah,
receiving Pell Grants.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I saw this one come in, and this is one that I thought of when I was going through my college going process. So I'm glad it was asked. Is there a drastic difference between submitting FAFSA in October compared to later in the year?
Good question. So FAFSA in itself will not give you a different result based on when you submit it. However, schools, organizations, and/or states could have deadlines that do give priority based on when you submit it. So that's one thing to keep in mind, right? Um, I sometimes partner with other schools in the area to do presentations, and I want to say it was UNCG. They have a significant amount of scholarships that does run out after a certain time, right? So if you wait until April to submit your FAFSA, you might have missed out on potential scholarship money. That's not the case at every school, but I do recommend filling it out as soon as you're able to, just to make sure that the schools are getting it and you kind of have the best chance at getting the information you need to make that decision. To me, that's kind of where it is with Wake. It doesn't You wouldn't get a different amount of money depending on when you submitted it, but if you need to know the financial part, I recommend kind of thinking of admissions and financial aid as a parallel process. So as you're working on your admissions applications, there's no reason to not go ahead and complete your FAFSA. Make sure that's done and submitted because if there's anything else you need to do to follow up, you've got time to do that before school starts.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say the earlier the better. It's
Yep.
always better to be prepared than doing last minute and kind of freaking out, not knowing what you have to do. We've all been in that situation.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, another one that I think will apply to some people watching here too. So, if I am a student who is planning on transferring and I'm not going to start this fall 2026, but I'm going to transfer for spring 2027, do I still do the 26-27 FAFSA?
Yes, you will. So, um, whatever schools you're going to attend between August of 26 through June of 27 are going to require you to have that 26-27 FAFSA completed to receive aid consideration. So yes, even if you're not starting until spring 27 or you're transferring, you still will have to do the 26-27 FAFSA.
And along those lines, students who are going to college for 4 years, a lot have been asked, do we have to do the FAFSA every year?
You do have to do it every year. Every year you're going to get better at it and you're going to be a pro by the end. You do have to do the FAFSA every year, but that's important that to do it every year because then it captures what's actually going on, right? So as things kind of trend in your family, it's capturing it. Again, it might not be perfect because of kind of the time differences and nuances of the information it's asking, but it is kind of reevaluated every year. So you will have to complete that for the whole time your student's in school.
All right. And something else that I have seen that I think might apply to a lot of people, will savings or investments in my name affect my aid?
Who asked the question? Was it a parent or a student?
I believe it was a parent.
Okay. Will savings and investments in their name impact the
Yes.
student's aid? So it depends on the types of investments and assets, right? If we're talking strictly FAFSA, it's asking about cash checking savings. So that will be, that's considered investments, not your primary residence, but like if you have a secondary house or a rental house, that's kind of asked. And if there's businesses and business assets. So those are considered kind of in the big picture. Something that's not considered that sometimes I do see people misreport, and I only know that because we do the profile and I can catch it. Sometimes people in error report their like 401ks. You don't report like protected retirement assets. But if you have like more liquidable assets, like just stocks and bonds not tied to retirement, any secondary properties, cash checking savings, that all is considered when it evaluates the student's financial aid for federal reasons.
All right. And on the flip side, so if it is a student
Yeah,
and they have a savings, what
yeah.
about that scenario?
So it does impact them as well. The student is the one going to school, so their stuff is looked at maybe a little more closely, right? Because they're expected to contribute as well. So yeah, if they have savings in their name, that is going to be counted. there are like allowances built into this whole process, right? Like the government doesn't expect you to spend every single penny you have to send your kids to school. Now, the choices you make on where you send your kids to school could feel like you're, having to do that, but that's not what the formula is designed for. There are some protections built in to protect some of your assets, but student assets are counted.
Okay, thank you. And I did see a question come in. I know this relates to tons of people, not just this
Yeah.
person, but they feel like they're a little late to the game submitting the FAFSA because their student graduates in May. Is it too late?
It's never too late. It's never too late. It doesn't take a long time, right? Like you could literally log on tonight, have not created an account, and y'all could submit the FAFSA tonight and it will be to schools by Tuesday. So you're not too late. If you haven't done it, I do highly suggest you try to prioritize it. It's an easy weekend task, it's an easy weeknight task. Um, Try and knock it out. If you need help, get with, whoever can help you to get it completed. But again, you're not too late, but coming into March and April, you're going to start getting admissions offers if you haven't already. And schools aren't able to provide financial aid packages until they have the financial piece. So you may have an admissions offer and you've got 2 weeks to decide. However, you haven't submitted your FAFSA, so now you don't have a financial aid offer to kind of know if it's going to work or not. So it's not too late, but definitely try and prioritize it. That way you can make sure you can have the information you need when the time comes.
Thank you so much for that. We still have
Yeah,
a lot of great questions coming in.
good.
So
I love
please
it.
please keep submitting them. Yeah, the more you submit, the better we can help you. And one person asked, so when they complete the form, it's completed on both their side and their contributor's side. How do they know when their colleges receive them?
So I think that's going to vary per school and timing. It depends on like what application round you applied for, right? Like if you applied for a regular decision, you might not hear anything from a school for a while until they release those decisions. Um, for me, I would, if I was in that situation, I would probably number one, check back in like 3 business days to make sure it says fully processed in studentaid.gov. All schools have some type of like admissions or financial aid portal you'll have access to. The student should be able to see if their FAFSA is marked as received within that admissions portal, or they could just reach out to admissions or financial aid at that school and they should be able to pull up if the FAFSA has been received. So I don't know that it's a common practice for all schools to send out a notification once it's received, other than like the official award offer. But I think there's ways that students can kind of take some initiative to number one, confirm it was fully processed by FAFSA in the Department of Education, and then also to follow up with the schools to make sure it's been received.
Thank you. Yeah, every school is different,
Yeah.
in my experience too.
Yes.
So it's also important to continuing to reach out to the schools that you're interested in.
Yep.
Um, and along those lines, I know every students have different circumstances, and the FAFSA does its best to try to accommodate those circumstances. But if there are special circumstances for a student, they're not really sure what to do. What do you think is the best thing, or where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah. My advice is to reach out to the schools you're applying to. We get tons of emails and calls from prospective students or prospective student high school counselors that are sitting with their prospective students, right? Your high school counselor is a great person to go to for support because they can actually be the one on the phone and you can just be sitting in their office and they can kind of help you navigate that conversation so it doesn't feel like you're on the spot and you don't know what to say. Um, I mean, I literally talked to one earlier today and she was trying to help her student kind of navigate a unique situation and figure out what's the best next steps. So I really think reaching out to the school, like we want to help students succeed whether you end up at our school or not. It's about access. And so reaching out to the school, I think, is hands down the best way to go.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I've seen some questions come in about making a certain income and not qualifying for aid. Is filling the FAFSA still important? I'm sure you've experienced a lot of that working in your position. So, what is your best advice to those?
Yeah, I mean, it's it is we have to put in what it is, right? Like, because you're saying like the income amounts. The thing is that income amounts are relative to other things, and that's kind of what the formula of the FAFSA does. A household that makes 100,000 in income with only a parent and a student looks very different than a household that makes $100,000 income that has six people in the house, right? So I mean, it really depends on the whole family situation. It depends on if certain benefits are received. It depends on assets. Like there's so many different components to it that unfortunately it's not quite as straightforward as just like an income number being eligible or not. With that being said, there are scholarships that may not be need-based that are still going to require that FAFSA. We also, I'll use Wake Forest as an example. We award like institutional need-based aid. We have a little bit of a different formula for that calculation, and we have a lot of families that may not be eligible for any grants. But if we don't have a FAFSA on file, we can't award any institutional need-based aid if they qualify for that. So, you never really know until you submit it. And so to me, there's really like no harm in submitting the FAFSA. The worst they do is just give you the grade level loan amount and you can decline it if you don't want it. But if you don't do it, you could be losing out on some money potentially.
I think that's great advice because I know that that's a situation that happens a lot with certain students and they're not really sure where they need to go or what they need to do. So really appreciate your insight on that. And we've gotten a lot of fantastic questions and hopefully been able to answer a lot of that. I know some questions are being answered in the chat right now. So once those get answered, we'll go ahead and end it. But one thing I do want to send out real quick to everybody in the chat is this cfnc.org/events page. This is where we host webinars for students and parents and families. So if you find webinars like this useful, we highly encourage you to register for them. Once again, cfnc.org/events. I sent it through the chat. We'll have webinars similar to this, similar how to pay. And then coming up on February 19th, we're having one on walking through award letters together. And so while we're finishing out this little last rounds of questions, Lauren, when students receive their award letters, what is the best thing for them to do to kind of understand what they're receiving?
Yeah. Well, number one, I recommend them attending y'all's next webinar to figure out what tips and tools they might have in comparing them. Because really, you have to compare. It's so important to compare. And why is it important? Because almost every school you're going to apply to costs a different amount. So like 30,000 at one school and scholarship is going to look very different than 30,000 at another school. So it's really important that you kind of compare the actual cost to the money you're receiving. You're making sure you're looking at the difference between scholarship and grants, which is that free money, versus like loans or work study that you have to either pay back or work for. Um, it could look very different school to school. Um, I mean, I'll do a quick kind of plug for not counting out private schools, not Wake Forest, but like doing the net price calculator is, another great thing, right? Like you can get an estimated, you've got your offer, but I tell some families that if you're going to have like a change in number in college in future years, or your income's going to change because somebody's retiring, you can run the net price calculator for year 3 and 4. And that way you kind of know all 4 years what is my, essential estimated cost going to be. Um, but you know, you've got to look at each school individually. That's kind of the key, right? Because like I said, every school is going to cost a different amount. And that scholarship doesn't translate across the board evenly. You also need to check to see like what's renewable. Sometimes there are like extra requirements for things to be renewed year to year. Sometimes maybe it's strictly on um, what your applications say, but there could be other things tied to it. So it's just important, like review the terms, find out if they're renewable, um, and ask questions, right? Like most schools don't match offers from other schools, but it never hurts to ask questions, right? So, I mean, just really lean into all the resources that the school provides, that your counselors have for you, um, and take the time to really break it down. You'll thank your future self.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah,
Absolutely. You'll thank your future self.
yeah.
That's wonderful advice. And this was such great insight, Lauren. We really appreciate you walking through the FAFSA, answering these questions. Want to thank everybody on the back end who was vigorously typing, as I
Yes,
saw, to
thank
answer all the
you.
questions that came in. So once again, everybody, this is going to be recorded. We're going to send it to you, and we're also going to send the slides to you in a follow-up email within the next week. But thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight. We hope you have a good night and we hope you have a good weekend coming up as well. Thank you, everybody.